Hi, my name is Joanna Fantozzi, Associate Editor with Nation's Restaurant News, and we're speaking with Focus Brands CEO Jim Holthouser about how his company has navigated the pandemic crisis over the past couple of months and what their plan is moving forward. How are you?
I'm doing well.
So I just to begin, as someone who started their tenure as CEO just a little while before the pandemic began, must have been like being tossed into the deep end. Can you walk me through what that experience has been like and what unique challenges you faced being new to the role?
Yes, sure. Happy to. It was interesting. I had about 2 weeks, 2 full weeks in the office, sitting in the chair, with a full team in our building in our innovation center in Atlanta. And by week three, right, we had sent many hundreds of people home to work from home. By week four, we were unfortunately announcing some furloughs and layoffs, and and so yeah, that basically all happened in about a 3 or 4 week period. So it was incredibly fast. So to your point, yes, I stepped in and probably at the most inauspicious point. So um, now that said, I don't want to exaggerate the burden, because I was as I learned, I was blessed with an extremely good team who managed who managed us through this quite nicely. They've we've had a business continuity team that was set up before I got there. So it's basically all parts of the company. They're meeting twice a day. In fact, they're still meeting every single day. At first, it was about 7 days a week, and now it's every day. Our operators are meeting. It's just been really I think it's been textbook in terms of how you communicate, how you coordinate, how you collaborate in a big company and in a crisis. I was so incredibly impressed and pleased with the team I inherited.
hmm And with all the different brands under your belt, it must have been challenging to navigate the differences uh, between approaches, perhaps. So could you kind of catch me up on how the different focus brands have fared over the past 8 weeks or so? If there have been, as you mentioned, closures, layoffs, and kind of what the timeline is for those?
Yeah, let's start with the brands. To your point, some of the brands have fared a little bit better than others, and during the pandemic, no secret to you or any of your readers, your mall-based businesses have had the toughest times. Those are typically what we refer to as our snack brands. It's Auntie Anne's, which is before the pandemic it's about a 2,000 unit chain, globally. It's
Mhm.
and then Cinnabon is also about 1,300 units, around the world. So those brands have probably had the toughest time. Kind of in the middle, we would have our sandwich brands, McAllister's, and maybe Jamba. I'd probably put that in that category too, and Moe's. And interestingly, the brand that is in our portfolio that has done the best and been affected the least really is Schlotzsky's, and that's simply because it has a very large percentage of its units with drive-thrus.
Absolutely.
And so yeah, and then also it's also the brands that were probably the best prepared from a digital standpoint, right? Have also I guess enjoyed a lot of success, right? As they've opened up these new channels to customers. So our McAllister's brand has done a wonderful job building out its app, its web presence, and its commercial capabilities, through these digital channels. And again, it's been so impressive what that brand's been able to do. So as I think about it, in fact, that's really one of my top priorities in the company is really finishing out all these digital tools and capabilities for all seven of the brands, simply because I think it's going to be tougher for customers to come back to dining in restaurants for a while, right? Through no fault of our own. Restaurants are going to have to kind of prove to customers that these are safe, comfortable environments again. Um, we've basically taught 350 million people in this country over the last couple of months how to interact with us very differently, right? Through apps and websites and curbside, and it's just, all kinds of new ways of interacting with restaurants. So, it's I don't think we'll ever quite go back to the restaurant industry that we knew in the beginning of February. I think it's for parts of it, and I think will be forever changed.
Yeah. And it's great that you mentioned drive-through, the importance of drive-through and delivery, because and digital rather, and delivery, of course. That seems to be what we're hearing over and over again. That if that it's easier to kind of that if you're a brand who has these under your belt, in your toolkit under your belt, if you already have a robust drive-through, delivery, digital platforms, then you're sort of poised to pivot easier. And is
Right.
that kind of what you guys felt as well?
Yeah, and yeah, I think you could pivot easier, and but also I mean, even that. Even these tools alone, aren't going to help you 100%. They're not going to get you back to where you were before the pandemic. But there's also been some really cool innovation. Again, I mean, we've seen it all over our brands. I'm sure you've seen it across the industry too, where I think it's incredibly clever where you can have, for example, restaurants in strip malls, or and all of a sudden they create these makeshift drive-throughs, right? They didn't have them before, right? That's basically how customers want, how they're comfortable and how they can interact with you now, right?
Hmm.
And I know we've sent out instructions to, for example, to Jamba, right? I mean, they those that brand typically doesn't have a lot of drive-throughs, but just by being creative and buying some orange cones from Lowe's and an umbrella from Amazon.com, and employing a runner, from the parking lot to the store, guess what? You can make a temporary or makeshift drive-through, and that has worked really, really well in this environment.
Hmm. And so kind of talking about your, as you pointed out, your mall-based brands, and I find that that a lot of them are also in transportation and transit hubs as well. Your Auntie Anne's and Cinnabon, and even sometimes even somewhat Jamba. So what is your strategy, I guess, moving forward for these types of places as people are sort of nervous to congregate maybe in these hubs where a lot of people would gather, like malls or transportation places?
Right. That's a good question. And the nice thing is, as you know, malls have begun to open up slowly. We've actually sent people in. As some of our restaurants and malls are reopening. Obviously our team is in to help them reopen and make sure things go smoothly. Um, Traffic is not what it was. All right, a lot of the retail it hasn't even completely come back yet, right? So I'd say so malls are, even though they may be open, they're still off to a pretty slow start. At least what we've seen in the last couple of days, right? And it's something that we'll watch very carefully. Um, I would say that Auntie Anne's in particular, because that's really the brand in our portfolio with the most exposure to malls. We've been diversifying its location types over the last several years. So this isn't new. So consequently, you'll see more and more of them in street side locations. We've also been opening a few around universities. But probably, I think one of the most creative solutions is kind of the advent of the food truck. So we've got 30 food trucks, and basically they're basically franchises on wheels. So they're basically Auntie Anne restaurants on wheels that can go from location to location to location, depending on where people in demand happen to be.
Mhm.
So we've also just launched the first Jamba, basically smoothie truck as well. So I think it's pretty clever, right? Because that way you're not tied down to bricks and mortar. You're not tied down to a location whose traffic dynamics can change over time. I think it's just brilliant. So yeah, you're seeing different kinds of locations in the brands. The other thing I'd say too is that all malls aren't created equal. Some as you know, they're graded based on foot traffic and revenue per square foot and everything else. And so as we look at our brands, that are in the malls, we're looking at, well, how many are in A and B and C and D locations, right? And the nice thing is, again, the brand's been really well managed, and over time we've been moving away from a lot of the C and certainly the D level malls. You have a little bit of exposure there, but the vast majority of these systems are in A and B malls, so they're good quality malls still, right? And I guess the big question is to what degree will traffic return, and how long will it take?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that we look at, because we have a big international operation, we're in 60 countries, and predominantly outside of the U.S., our stores are Auntie Anne's and Cinnabon. So we can look to Asia, right, where the pandemic began. That was a good month or 2 months ahead of us, and so we can watch malls, what's going on in countries very, very far away, to see what we can learn from them in terms of how long traffic takes to return, right? What do sales look like 30 days, 60 days, 90 days after malls reopen. So we're kind of triangulating and learning from basically some of the consumer patterns that we're watching in Asia.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting that thinking of foot traffic, the idea of the food trucks, it sort of imitates foot traffic in that way, because while I might be craving an Auntie Anne's pretzel if I'm in a mall, I might not necessarily think to drive to one. But if I see one outside walking around my neighborhood,
Kind of cool.
then I would. It would kind of imitate that similar occasion.
And what else is kind of cool? Again, as you know, there's so much cool innovation. I mean, if there's a silver lining in all this, it really forces everybody in the industry, right, to just think out of the box and get really, really creative, right? So, I mean, in addition to some of the things we've talked about, the makeshift drive-thrus, you've seen a lot of menu innovation too, right? And as the traffic patterns have shifted more to dinner hour versus the lunch hour in these quick service restaurants, and so you've now got, you're now selling not just individual portions of food, you're selling family meals. So you've got McAllister, you got deli packages now that are basically designed to serve families. You've got taco kits and the Moe's Market. I mean, again, so I think that's kind of one fun kind of innovation. But back to your Auntie Anne's point you made a few minutes ago. We're also doing do-it-yourself kits with Auntie Anne. So if you can't get to the mall and enjoy your favorite pretzel, right, you can actually buy a kit, and you can do it at home. So
something I'll have to try.
Yeah, it's cool.
So, do you think that those menu innovations, like you mentioned, the meal kits, the McAllister's Deli meal kits, for example, do you think that will continue even after restaurants? I mean, obviously, restaurants are continuing to open up all over the country, but do you think that kind of innovation will continue?
I think it will, to a degree. Again, as workers return to offices and into their places of business, and again, I guess that's a big question as to what degree they will ultimately, right? Because one of the things this pandemic has taught us is that the world can go on. People, people can office pretty well and work effectively from home, just like you and I are doing right now, right? I mean, through Zoom technology. So, but I'm assuming, right, to some large degree, right, workers will return to offices. Again, maybe not 100% of what it was, but let's say 80-90%. Well, that's going to shift demand patterns again back to something that we're very familiar with, right? Where most of it's during the lunch hour, maybe 3/4 of your revenues come in the lunch hour, 1/4% in the evening. But again, I think we've taught customers in this pandemic that guess what, you can still go to a Moe's. It's just not a single order burrito anymore. There are other options, right? So as you're driving home, you're looking for a meal for your family, right?
Mm-hmm.
We'll see whether consumers still look to Moe's and McAllister's and brands like this to feed their families at dinner. I mean, it's worked during the pandemic. And so, but I guess ultimately the answer to the question is, it'll ultimately depend on the customer. So I know that as an industry, we would love to see it, because these things are they're much higher ticket items, right? Instead of $5 or $6, I mean, you're looking at $25-$30. So I sure hope it continues, and I guess ultimately, I guess the customer and the market will decide.
Yes. And speaking of, as things are reopening kind of quickly, actually, pretty much across the country, how do you think operations are going to change as we navigate into this new normal?
Yeah. Well, again, well, we've already seen some of the challenges with dining in, right? And again, my own opinion is that that's going to be a very slow recovery, right?
Yeah.
Consumers have lots and lots of different options for how they not only order but also how they how where they consume our food products. So again, I do think that's going to be fairly slow. And ultimately, who knows how long it'll ultimately take to get a vaccine. And then once you get a vaccine, it could be many months before there's enough production to satisfy the demand all around the world, right? So I guess the way I look at it, this is probably going to be with us for a while. To what degree and to what degree of severity, I'm not really sure. You got to prepare for basically any kind of scenario. But to answer your question, I mean, obviously the masks are here to stay, and good filtration systems are here to stay, and hand sanitizing stations and restaurants. I mean, you think about that, this has all come about in about 2 months, you know, and I just don't think those are going to go away anytime soon, right? And yeah, and obviously finding workers to be in the restaurants. I mean, in some cases it's a little bit easier to, and sometimes more lucrative depending on the state you're in, to stay home. I think that creates some challenges for restaurant owners, right? And again, you have to encourage people, if they're not feeling well, to go home.
Mm-hmm. That's a big lesson, that's for sure.
That's a big
Um,
lesson. So yeah.
so, what do you think, as kind of a final question, what do you think is what will be the biggest challenge for you as you move forward over the next month or couple of months?
Yeah, as I said, business loves certainty. you know, and you're just in an uncertain environment right now. As I say, we're very optimistic about sales returning this summer. We're seeing good patterns in our own business. There's been some marked improvements, I would say, especially over the last 2 or 3 weeks. So on one hand, you want to be very optimistic, right? That we are recovering, that the worst is behind us, right? On the other hand, you watch the news, and there might be a second wave of this in the late fall. So what I would say is that the biggest challenge is planning and moving your business forward, right? And in a time of great uncertainty. I think that's probably the challenge for all businesses right
Hmm. Okay, great. I think then that's all the questions I have. Thank you so much, Jim, for taking the time to speak with us.
now. It was a pleasure. Take care. We'll see you
You
next
have
time.
a great afternoon.